Welcome back. My name is Homai. In this video, we are going to explore counterpoint, in particular species counterpoint. So I'm going to give you a very basic overview of what species counterpoint is. I'm going to give you kind of my take on it, which is going to be obviously a little bit more influenced by tonal harmonic principles. So it's not going to be nearly as strict as pure species counterpoint. So what is counterpoint? Okay? Well, counterpoint is simply the process, the art of composing two melodies, a melody and a counter melody, against each other. Okay? Just two voices. And when we're writing with two voices, we're mostly concerned with the interval between the two voices. That's what we're focused on. We're not really thinking about the harmonies that are being produced. We really just care about the intervals. So, we learned about what a melody is. If you haven't watched those videos, you can definitely check them out. In counterpoint, the melody has a different name. We call it the cantus firmus, which is Latin, cantus firmus. Okay? And the cantus firmus, okay, is very, very strict in its pure form, very strict in terms of what you can write and what you can't write. You have to avoid dissonant leaps, for example. The tritone has to be avoided. The major seventh has to be avoided. It's very restrictive. But for our purposes, we're going to free it up and we're going to allow you to do almost anything you want to do, so long as it sounds good to you. So let's take a look here. So a basic cantus firmus might be something like this. Again, you're going to have that single high point. Okay. This would be a simple cantus firmus. One rule of a cantus firmus too is that the last two notes, you have to arrive at the tonic by step. Okay? Oftentimes with the leading tone, which is what I've done here. So let's take a listen to this cantus firmus melody. Okay? So that would be an acceptable cantus firmus. Now, first species counterpoint. So what's known as first species counterpoint is where you have a counter melody that is a 1-to-1 ratio with your cantus firmus. So let's take a look at this, for example. I'll change the color, and I'm going to keep it on the same staff just so it's easier to see. So I'm going to have a counter melody here, or maybe let's start, the perfect fifth. Okay. Now the rules of fundamental counterpoints are very strict. You must end with perfect intervals. You must start with perfect intervals. Because in the very early days of counterpoint, even thirds and sixths were considered not to be actually consonant intervals. They were heard as somewhat dissonant, at least in comparison to perfect intervals. If I write this, for example, and I only allow myself to use perfect intervals, let's take a listen to see what this might sound like. So let's say in this case I start with a fourth, and I leave this counter melody so that it's a perfect fifth, and maybe I drop to an octave, go back to my perfect fifth here, maybe I leap to a C to make that a perfect fourth, perhaps, and then let's say that I keep it as a C here, so I still have the perfect fifth here. I'm literally writing this in such a way that I just maintain perfect intervals. Okay? And then in this case, maybe I share this note, okay? And then I go back down to, say, this G. Okay? Now, in the last two notes, you might notice that the B is the leading tone. I've doubled the leading tone, which you wouldn't normally do, because the leading tone has a tendency to resolve to tonic, so both voices would want to resolve to tonic. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like together. Okay? So that would be a very pure, very old type of first species counterpoint, almost towards Gregorian chant, where thirds and sixths were avoided for some time. And I'm just going from perfect fourths, fifths, and octaves. So now this time, I'm going to allow myself to use thirds, sixths, other intervals. Okay? But I'm going to avoid seconds and sevenths and any intervals that are dissonant, such as the augmented fourth or diminished fifth. So in this case, let's say that I start with, I could start with the sixth, for example, and maybe I do a series of parallel sixths. Maybe I allow this to go to a B to lead up to tonic here, perfect fourth, and maybe perfect fourth, and let's say I go to the octave, and maybe I go to a perfect fifth here, and maybe I keep that as an A and go down to the G here, and then maybe I stay as a G. So if I do my interval analysis here, I've got a 6, 6, 6. That's good. Then I go to a third. Third sound good. Here's a perfect fourth. Here's a perfect octave. Here's a perfect fifth. Here's a perfect fourth, a third, and a fourth here. So I have some perfect intervals consecutively. Now, in very pure species counterpoint, it was considered, if you were going to have two consecutive perfect intervals, in order to keep it interesting, you could only approach it by oblique motion or by contrary motion, but not similar motion. So if you take a look here, going from the fourth to the octave, I went by contrary motion. From the octave to the fifth, I went by contrary motion. And from the fifth to the fourth, I did oblique motion. So that follows the rules of first species counterpoint. Let's take a look and listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so that is an example of first species counterpoint. But we have 5 species of counterpoint. So, and this is just an overview video, just to give you some information about this. You are welcome to explore this, of course, more. In second species counterpoint, this time you have 2 voices again. And in this case, I'm just going to show you this way. But this time, one voice, typically the top voice, will have 2 notes against 1. 2 notes against 1. Okay? Now they wouldn't actually all be the same notes like this. So let's say that I'm taking my same music that I have written above, and I want to convert it into second species counterpoint. So let's say I decide to keep my lower voice the same. That's what I had before. And this time, I'm going to create a second species counterpoint against that. So that means that I'm going to do something a little bit more creative. Let's say that I'm going to try to arrive at the same notes that I did the first time. Okay, let's see how this works. I want to arrive at the same notes. This is where it gets a little bit interesting, because we also have to consider the intervals that are created. So for example, at this point I have a sixth, but at this point I have a fifth, right? So I need to make sure my intervals are still consonant. Now I'm allowed to use dissonant intervals like seconds and sevenths, but I must resolve them to consonant intervals, and I must precede them with consonant intervals. But let's see if we can do this mostly with consonants. So here we've got these two. Okay, so now I need to get to this E here. I see an opportunity. Let me go to the F. So this is a sixth and then an octave, then it moves in contrary motion to sixth. That's going to work just fine. Then I'm going to a third here. All right, here's one way I could do it. I could go down to a C, take me to a fourth, which then goes up to a third. So I'm just kind of being creative here with how I accomplish this. In this case, I could just do a passing motion here. Works because this is a consonant fourth, a perfect fourth. I do end up with 2 fourths in a row. But fourths are not generally considered as bad as parallel fifths or parallel octaves. Although in very, very pure species counterpoint, a lot of people would say that that's kind of not preferable. So it depends who you speak to. Okay, so let's say here, I don't want to go to this A, because if I go to this A, I'm going to be moving in similar motion, which in pure species counterpoint is kind of a no-no. So instead, let me go down to an E here, and then go up to the G, which gives me a third, leading to the octave. Okay, and then in this case, let's use the seventh. I think this is a good opportunity to use the minor seventh, leading to the fifth. And then maybe I'll do a third here that resolves up to the fourth. And maybe I'll walk down, which creates a third and parallel thirds. And let's say that I decide to maybe use an anticipation here. This can be done on occasion, ending on that. So let's take a listen to how this second species sounds. Okay, and that is an example of a decent second species counterpoint. Third species. What is third species? Third species counterpoint is where we have 4 notes against 1. So now we have quarter notes against whole notes. This is third species counterpoint. The rules are generally the same. Okay, but now you have to consider a little bit more. And you might think that this might be harder to compose, but actually in a lot of ways it's actually easier because you can, find a lot more motions that work. So let's take the same example that we had here. Okay? Take exactly the same example for fun. And I'm going to do it right here so I can see it. And writing like this is it's a lot of fun. It's good practice. It's good at making you think like a composer and make you problem solve a little bit. So I'm going to use my same lower voice here. I need to give myself a little room since I'm going to have 4 notes. Okay. And now I'm going to do my third species against this. So I'm going to start again with a C here, then I go to a D. I'm going to try to accomplish the same task, which is resolve to the same notes. Obviously, I don't need to do that, but hey, let's have a little bit of a challenge. Not saying that this is actually going to be that difficult to accomplish, but who knows, right? So again, third species, you are definitely allowed to use dissonant intervals. You just don't have more than one at a time. Okay, so only if you have a dissonant interval, precede it and follow it with consonants. So again, I'm going to write my interval. I've got a sixth here, a sixth here, a sixth here, a third, fourth, octave, fifth, fourth, third, fourth. Okay? All right, so here I go. Let's do something like this. I can go to a D, and then a B, and then a C, for example. What intervals do I have? It goes to a seventh, which is dissonant. But then it goes to a fifth, which is consonant. Then to a sixth, parallel sixth. That sounds nice. Okay, let's try something here. Maybe I could do the same pattern here because I have a 666. So I'll do this. By the way, that's what we call a sequence because I did the same thing more than one time. Okay? And that sounds nice. Let's go on. And it's one thing watching someone else do this, observing me do this, for example. Try this on your own. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised on what you can create in a pretty short amount of time. All right, so in this case, we're going from this E, and maybe I decide to go up to the F, which makes this a seventh. Oh, I didn't write these intervals here. Let's write these intervals. Okay, a seventh, and I need to follow this with consonants. So maybe in this case, I go back to the E, and then maybe I go to a C here, which is a fourth. Then I end up here. And notice I'm using a lot of stepwise motion. I'm using some skips, but most of the motion is stepwise. If I did a lot of leaps, it's going to be very problematic. Okay, let's see here. So maybe in this case, let's do something interesting. Just because I know it's going to be a little bit more dissonant. So in this case, I decided to go really dissonant. I went to a C here, which is actually a minor second. And then it resolves to a third, which is a consonant interval, sixth and a fourth. That's going to be really cool. That's going to be a point of interest right there. Okay, so I want you to pay attention to that moment when we hear that nice, close dissonance that we're going to get in this melody. Let's continue here. Let's see, what can we do here? We want to probably ascend to the G here. So if I'm working backwards, I'm going to want to do something like that. So maybe I go to the second again, like that. So that would be a second, then a third, then a fourth. Going to the octave in contrary motion. I wanted to go in contrary motion because I know my lower voice is descending. I don't want to go in similar motion, so I didn't want to lead to the A. Otherwise, that definitely won't sound as good. All right, and going on here, let's see what we can do here. There's lots of options. Why don't we do something like, we haven't done a leap to start with. Let's try a leap to start with. And sure, let's outline. Actually, we can't do that because we'll have parallel fifths here. So let's do this instead. Okay, so I've done a third, which takes me to a sixth, down to a fifth, to a dissonant interval, a seventh, and resolving to a fifth. And let's try something like this, just because thirds followed by some seconds. That takes me to the interval of a seventh again, but then I'm going to a sixth, down to a fifth, down to a fourth by oblique motion. And let's do something interesting here. I'll do a little pattern where I go up a second, down a third, up a second, down a third. So that's a fourth to a fifth to a third to a fourth to a third. And then let's do this. Like this. So a third to a fourth to a fifth to a third and a fourth. And I should make this a whole note. Let's take a listen to this third species example. That's nice. It worked really well. Fourth species. So what is fourth species counterpoint? Let me show you. In fourth species counterpoint, we get to introduce suspensions. All right? So you've got your whole notes again, but in your other voice, you're going to now have half notes again, but this time you have suspensions. Like this. All right, and so on and so forth. Now, in this case, I would have no choice but to kind of change this a little bit. I can change my first one into fourth species pretty well. Let me show you how I might do that. So I go to the note early. See this? Go to the note early. Okay? I go to the note early. To the note early. Early. Okay, like this. A series of anticipations, basically. Or suspensions. Let's take a listen to see how this fourth species sounds. Dissonance, resolution, dissonance, 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 that's fourth species counterpoint. Fifth species counterpoint combines everything together, that's all. So let's just jump back and forth between the examples we've already created here. So maybe I start with my fourth or my third species. Maybe my fourth species with the suspension. And then maybe my second species here. Maybe back to my third species here. And then maybe my fourth species. And there you have it. That is a very, very quick, brief overview of counterpoint, species counterpoint. Cantus firmus, the counter melody, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth species. I hope this was very interesting for you. Again, best thing you can do is just to play around with it, have a little fun with it, allow yourself to create things that don't sound good, because in this process, that's how you're going to learn. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.